So then we are back with more understandings on the time of the Second Tabernacle service. Is very refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we must have an understanding of this prophet as the very core and center of the explanation of the Torah and the prophets. Not saying that Yeshayahu the prophet wrote the Torah, only explaining because during his time most of the Israelites had abandoned the Torah. So then Yeshayahu the prophet was then endowed with understanding from heaven, so then he would point people back to the instructions. Based from these, then we must realize the very important work of Yeshayahu was not only that he was a prophet, but he was pointing people back to the instructions. So then, based from these understanding, let's try then from thousands of years ago, from the time where then the first covenant was established with Ibrahim and the Creator himself. Let's then study and evaluate some of the myths regarding the holy instructions. Firstly, let's then be absolutely clear. The Creator himself is not mystical. He has no reason for being mystical. And he is not mystical. We were people made for the earth. We are not people made for heaven. His realm is not the same as our realm. We were made for the earth. Therefore, there is no mixture of people of the earth and heaven. What there is, there are instructions where then we have our obligation. We have the obligation of reading it for our own benefit. This world is contaminated with the powers of the Spirit beyond understanding, and quite honestly, some of these understandings we should not be involved with because it's extremely dirty. So then, let's give some examples of mysticism found in the Holy Instructions. You find then, as an example, the 41st chapter of Bereshit, known as Genesis, where then Pharaoh had dreams. So then, Pharaoh was there and he was obviously enjoying a time of his rulership. And then came Joseph. He was in prison for quite some time because he didn't want to have a relationship with the wife of the authority of the time. And then he ended up in prison. But he was very faithful. He was very responsible of himself and how he conducted himself. As he was there for quite some time, then Pharaoh had a dream regarding those 7 cows that were very fat and very beautiful cows. And then later on came another dream of 7 lean cows. And the 7 lean cows ate the 7 fat cows. And then he awoke. Then he went back to rest, and then came then the years of the plants, or then the crops. And then there were lots of them that were very rich, very flourished with grain. And then 7 of them were then stalks of them were very lean, ugly. and the ugly ate the very nice and flourishing stalks of grain. And then he awoke again. Then he was concerned. Then in the morning he obviously went to his diviners over there and those liars and scoundrels of the time, and they could not give a favorable answer to Pharaoh. But then there was a person that was in prison with Joseph for quite some time, and then brought him out of prison and then showed himself up to Pharaoh. And he gave Pharaoh then a very favorable answer. Ended up being the second most important person in Egypt, preparing then for the 7 years of famine. So then, what was the situation then regarding Pharaoh? He had dreams. Were they mystical? No, they were simply dreams. Were there any actions taken by Pharaoh during the time he had those dreams? No, except for the invitation of those diviners and scoundrels of his time, and they could not give him an answer. So then, let's backtrack a bit more during the time of Ibrahim and Sarah. Ibrahim knew his wife could not bear children, so he made a kind of a half a deal over there with the Egyptians, and then Pharaoh had some desire to know his wife, but then intervention from heaven came very strongly. And during his time, then he was obviously resting, and he felt and he saw during his dream he could not under any condition do what he was thinking of doing. And then Pharaoh returned Ibrahim's wife to himself. So then, because of this, let's then make an evaluation as far as then the Exodus, the 10th chapter. We know very precisely there were 10 plagues. Then you find these 10 precisely explained. Well, let's give an idea. It was then the damn frogs, lice, fleas, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, and then dark, and then slaying of the firstborn. Now let's ask ourselves first, do these had taken place? No. The same way Joseph explained the dream, so as Moses explained the dreams. There were no plagues upon Egypt. So then, what has made the Holy Instructions explaining to us via these that were then plagues? Unfortunately, the Holy Instructions were then edited later, explaining in such a way where then the reader would obviously read as if they were active or if they had taken place. But truly they didn't. So there is an establishment of heaven and humans where then there is an exchange of information via dreams. It's absolutely true. But let's evaluate what went on when then Moses was then in the backside of the desert. He was there for many years. And then came a time from the period of Joseph until Moses. There was then obviously a set of many years where then people, the new people that were being born, had no knowledge of Pharaoh, his understanding of the dream, and also what Joseph had done for the nation. They simply disregarded. And the people, then the Hebrews, were enslaved until the 10th chapter of Exodus. You find then these people, these Hebrews, then going through many trials. But then Moses was on the backside of the desert. He was there going after the animals. The animals did not like Moses. As he was then taking care of those stupid animals because they did not like to be around Moses, then one of them went out of his way and then got lost in a wild desert over there. And then Moses went after it. Then Moses got tired, very tired of going after those animals previously, and more so when he was alone over there trying to chase the stupid animal. Then he sat down and he rested. Thus then the Creator himself indicated what he should be doing. Thus you find then the burning bush. It was given then this information via dream. And then you understand this factor, and Moses was then talking back with the Creator himself, and they were exchanging some information, and at the end of it, obviously the Creator got his way. But then his brother Aaron was there helping him to do the work in Egypt. So then, there he was. Moshe then went on his way, and he gathered with his brother, and they went to Egypt, then obviously rescuing his people. Then he showed up before Pharaoh. Firstly then, there was a divine indication of the presence of Moses in the land of Egypt, because Egypt did not recognize anymore Moses for so many years. He was in the desert. He was not even known anymore during the time when he showed up to gather his people. But then, what can we establish as far as what Pharaoh dreamed or dreamt? Let's then evaluate what Moses had in mind. He wanted to rescue his people. However, not every Israelite came out of the place, or in Hebrew simply means those people who went after the river, the other side of the river Jordan. It simply means Hebrews. Then he was there, and he was explaining the situation, and he said, they're going to let the people go. Obviously then Pharaoh said, no, cheap labor should stay and do the work. And then, precisely when he said no, then Moses simply said, this night you're going to have this dream. And Moses simply turned around and went his way. Pharaoh did not give much focus to this because it was nonsense. But then during the night, when Pharaoh went to rest, he had precisely the dream. Moshe stated it. The next day, then, obviously Moses was in his presence once again. And he did this several times with the damn frogs, lice, fleas, pestilence, boils, hail, locusts, when the whole place became very dark. And the slaying of the firstborn was the last situation, and Pharaoh could not bear anymore, because his dreams were intensifying every night. Then at the very end of it, Pharaoh then made a deal with Moshe. Pharaoh then precisely said, you go and speak with the people, precisely as you have spoken with me. Not above, not below. And whosoever wants to go with you shalt go, and those who do not want to go, they must stay behind. So contrary of what we know of, roughly 600,000 of the Hebrews went with Moses, and the rest of them stayed behind. So what have we learned from these instructions ever since we were kids? Myths, simply myths. You find these Moses as nearly a military authority person that came to Egypt on his own understanding, and then Pharaoh was so afraid of him, and then there were 10 plagues, and at the end of it the entire nation went out, and then Pharaoh had an army after them. From then on, it was absolutely myths after myths after myths. None of these plagues had taken place. So then, there is a constant, and this constant is information exchanged from heaven and his people. You find these with Joseph, you find these with Moshe, you find these with Lot, and many others of Shilishim. They were simply indicated, there were exchange of information via dreams. So then, this time, what is going on in our world, in our age, nearly at the end of this age? There are lots of mysticism because the world is contaminated with evil powers, and people, they enjoy power, they don't care if it's evil or not. And the understanding of the spirit world, unfortunately, is extremely dirty ever since the holy cities were destroyed. So then, what has said then Shaliach? Make yourself then clean as far as body, soul, and spirit. This is very important because the spirit is the very link of human beings with the Creator himself. Since we understand the holy cities were around for 1,000 years, and prior of this time they were linked with the temple, but this time the spirit world is then obviously concerned because they understand the holy cities are returning, and the evil spirits, as far as we can understand from the giving of the miltha that were stored in the holy cities, must return, and the evils must be away from it. So then, reading from Moses, what was the reaction of Pharaoh? Then he said, take your people and then go away. However, do this, speak with the people as you have spoken with me. And some of the people believed it, and the great majority did not. That's the truth of it. Then we link this understanding with Luke, for instance, where you find most of the people at the end of time are going to be lost, and only a remnant, only a few, will find the way. So there is a constant from the time of Joseph, from the time of Moses, from the time of what Shaliach has said, and salvation. Salvation, the true salvation, is not for everybody. Some people, they hear the holy instructions purely and simply, and they mock it because they don't fit. So then, what can we establish then of Lot? Lot was then in the cities of the plain. He was very familiar with those places. And then those angels coming and then being with him and so on and so forth, it was also a dream. There were no angels that came walking. So as during the time of Ibrahim, angels coming to him during the day, it was not real. It was a dream. It was an exchange of information from heaven and those who were doing the work. So then, Lot was there. Then at some point, the evil was so great, and the Creator himself decided then to destroy those cities because of their evils. Then he sent a dream to Lot. And he did have this dream, and he did understand what was going on. Then he obviously was there for some time speaking with the people. They did not believe him. They were mocking him. And then the angel in another dream showed up to him and said, "You have to get out of the city." So as he did, except his wife then went back and she died with the rest of them. Many people ask, why is then the Dead Sea has such a high concentration of salt? Salt is simply the mineral that leaves the body after the body is completely burned. So the salt, and where then the Dead Sea Scrolls were near, they are simply from a stream of water and salt that came from the dead bodies of the cities of the plain. You've got your answer. So then, let's evaluate why then Lot did what he did. Were there then angels that were then placed in a house, and then Lot was trying to protect them and giving the daughter, in the midst of those places? Of course not. The Creator does not act in such a way. He would never send an angelic being, so then a daughter of a person that has no dealing with evil then being given away for sexual desires. You are crazy if you believe these. The Creator is holy, and he does not exchange the presence of his angels to give a daughter that has no link with evil being thrown into evil. So Lot had simply a dream, but he acted upon it and he was able to leave the place. However, the holy instructions, some of them do state that his wife then was observing back and became a column of salt. It's absolutely ridiculous. There was no column of salt. She simply returned back to the city and she was burned with the others. And there are many other kinds of examples. For instance, during the time of the completion of the spring feast, you find the Messiah himself. The very prophet Moses said for us, then we should listen. The Messiah himself completed the spring feast perfectly. Then he was in the inferno for 72 hours. Then he came back. Then he stayed with his people for a year, teaching them the holy feasts, very precisely the way they should perform. Now, Shimon, at some point he was in prison. There was no mysticism going on with Shimon as far as in the spirit, then the soldiers were absolutely, in quote, frozen and then Shimon went through the guards and went out. That's mysticism. Shimon simply received an indication that he would be placed at liberty from the prison. During the time of the Messiah, we can understand the spirit realm was extremely dirty. It was completely dirty with takanot and maasim. Laws that did not exist, that were placed on the holy instructions along with the words of the Creator himself. So the Messiah came and he cleaned up the holy instructions. At some point, the Messiah then was speaking with the Emmaus Road, with those people who were despondent because the Messiah had died. Sometimes you find then at the end of their journey, and there were miles, then he was explaining, starting from Moses. That's where our understanding then starts. So then what went on? And then the Messiah, Yahweh Yeshua, said, "Oh, you stupid people, and with a hard hearts to understand. Were not these situations should take place, so then the Messiah would enter into his glory." Then he began from Moses. Okay, let's understand. From Moses. Moshe. Why did he not start with the covenant made with Ibrahim or Abraham? Why did he start with Moses? Because the Messiah, he was explaining what was going on in the spirit, in the spiritual realm, prior to the physical realm. Was it not the Messiah explaining the coming of Ruach HaKodesh? Ruach HaKodesh is a spirit. How was the spiritual condition during the time of the Messiah? Very dirty. They were thinking only of money. That's what it was. The Messiah was constantly, in quote, fighting with his people regarding money. So much so that he adopted some of his parables linked with some sort of a financial gain. Otherwise, people would not listen to him. Then we find other sections. For instance, giving the example of the Emmaus Road, where then he stayed overnight with them. But he did not vanish from their eyes. Let's establish another point, as it was a constant during the time of Joseph, during the time of Lot, during the time of Moses, and during the time of Shimon, during the time of the Messiah, most importantly. He did not use mysticism. The Messiah spent time with them, they reclined and they ate, and then they went to rest. While they were resting, the Messiah simply went away during the night. And they had a dream how they should cultivate his spiritual presence by breaking of bread. Very simple, isn't it? Then, as far as we can understand, every kind of mysticism you find in the holy instructions, they were not there. Eliyahu, you find then a very important and strong prophet, went out in a chariot of fire. Did he do it? No. He received an understanding while he was resting that the Creator himself would take him out. There is no mysticism. The Creator is not there only to show the people what he can do and what he cannot. The simplicity is truly amazing. If you want to believe it and save your soul, there are instructions. Now, if you want to be entertained, and if you think the Creator himself is a clown, that he is there to entertain you from this dirty spiritual world for your own benefit, you can forget it. Stay with the world and die with the world. What else should we say regarding the mysticism? Daniel the prophet, extremely important prophet. You find in Daniel on 2nd chapter, what do we find? Then the king of Babylon had a dream. Isn't that amazing? Have you not heard of dream? So it was during the time of Joseph. So it was during the time of Moses. So it was during the time of Lot. Joel, for instance, at the end of time, your sons and daughters and your old people would have dreams and visions. Daniel, 2nd chapter. There he was, explaining then the situations, and then at some point, as he was then involved with the kingdom of Babylon, then the king had a dream of this huge statue. And back then it was very popular regarding those mysticisms and those people involved with the spiritual world of adoring and being involved in the worship of statues. That's why the Creator had chosen a statue with many kinds of metals, and then a head of gold and chest and arms of silver, and then you find the center of the body of bronze, and then you find the legs of iron, and then the base of the statue iron and clay. Then he awoke, and then he was absolutely determined in finding the answer, and he said to every of those diviners to come to his presence and say, I had a dream. You must say the dream and interpretation thereof. And they couldn't do it because they were scoundrels. However, Daniel was able, and he explained the dream. So then, what do we find, for instance, with Shaliach Shaul? Road to Damascus. He was there on the path, and his horse then got a bit upset. And Shaliach Shaul then, at the moment, at that time, he wasn't Shaliach yet. But then he obviously hit his head on the ground, and he was unconscious for some time. There where he received the understanding from heaven. Once again, no mysticism. What do we find as far as the coming from the dead? Ezekiel, very unique prophet, explains then the area of the mountain with lots of bones. Can these bones live? Also had a dream, and the Creator himself was exchanging information with him, directing him what to do, what to say, and how to act. simply symbolizing later on what the Messiah would do with those people who were in the grave. No mysticism. Nobody was amazed with such a dream. You must understand the Creator is very selective. He's not interested in people trying to mystify His holy works. He can defend Himself very properly. Then Shaliach Shaul. You find then he was there doing the work, and he came a time where he was speaking with a group of people, and he was explaining the time where then people would return from the dead. There are many layers involved with this. But then, are people going to be mystical and say they are going to heaven when they die? Isn't that being mystical? The Bikurim, or the first fruit, was already performed. The Messiah himself completed this part of the holy instruction when he then gathered those people, and then obviously they were in the presence of the Creator himself. There were the gatherings of these people already. No mysticism. So then we truly have to believe, don't we? Believe what then the prophets said. Is there a heaven to go to? No, there is not a heaven to go to. If we do not bear fruit, as Shaliach Yohanan has stated it, then we are taken aside and burned. We must bear fruit constantly. No mysticism. We must bear fruit. Now, are we going to use mysticism then to mesmerize the people to believe? No. Gideon, and then the plant over there that he was then taking water from, also was a dream. And many others, because they were receiving indications from heaven regarding actions that must be taken. Now the unbeliever, they are not involved in it. Firstly, because they would not understand. Second, it would make the situation much worse. Third, it would drive the people away rather than coming from a place and nearing them. The Messiah himself, the Savior, was he not then on a donkey coming towards Jerusalem? They were speaking of this military person with powers of then liberating Israel from the Romans and any other country, re-establishing then the kingdom of Shimon, known as Solomon. He came very simply on a donkey. People were watching him. That is then what they promised. So people didn't believe it. How many people were there at the site when he was then nailed to a stake? or a stud, or a pole. There were only a few. Because the Messiah said himself as king, he was going against then the existing Roman Empire, and then he was dealt with as a traitor. Any person linked with the Messiah would be thrown to prison or then put to death. How many were there with him? A few. Only for the sake of being part of his own family. Then the Roman authorities over there had an exception done, and they were there near him. Yohanan, was he then on the island of Patmos writing Megillus? That's truly a big one. Was he there under the order of the Emperor Domitian? Was he there under the sentence of spending the rest of his life on that poxy island over there and writing to those people outside of the island? Some people, they think the mysticism is so great that then God had sent a boat over there to get his Megillas and then distribute among the people then on the mainland. The instructions are very constant, and there is no mysticism. Then, was then Yohanan then on the island of Patmos? Yes, he was, but from there he never wrote. And he died on the island. Because Yohanan was speaking of a kingdom to come. When you speak of a kingdom to come government, on this age, when people are not prepared, the first situation they hear is a threatening of their own governments, religiously or not. Yohanan was considered as a traitor. He was exiled for life. From there he never left. What went on then with Yohanan? Now read Revelation. Where was he at? He was found in northern Africa, because the Messiah himself was completing the spring feast prior of his death. Then he completed the spring feast. Then he was placed on the stake. Then he was 72 hours then in the earth, in the inferno, Sheol. He saw the souls over there in torment, came back, spent a year with his people, teaching them precisely what to do with the holy instructions and the holy feasts, explained the time of the seat, the time of the restoration, and then the autumn feast, and then post-autumn feast and what to do afterwards. Then he left them. And the Messiah was not in the physical body of a person climbing up to heaven. It is true the Messiah was gone, but in the spirit, as those people were resting, believing what he said. He said very precisely, you people wait at the house of prayer during this specific time for the coming of Ruach HaKodesh. And those people, they had to rest. While they were resting, they received the understanding of himself then departing them. Yet they believed in Ruach HaKodesh would come. No mysticism. Other portions of the completion of the spring feast. Then the Messiah comes through the sides of a house, for instance, and then he vanishes. Those were understandings given when people were resting. But they can't mix. When people read the instructions, they tend to mix it. And some people say, these instructions are so boring. Obviously, it's not for you. You are lost. You are a boring, lost person. For instance, Cornelius. Let's then evaluate how then the powers that be always tries to manipulate for its own use. Cornelius was a centurion. He used to give orders to 100 men. Obviously, he saw many of the Hebrews coming around and spending time talking, and then they would lift up the Holy Torah amongst themselves, would read a section of it, and then they would wait. Sometimes they would receive some information, and then the next day they would gather around and would talk of this information given to someone. And Cornelius was absolutely amazed by these, because what they were saying were taking place. Then he wanted to become part of it. So after he had his duties done, then he would take his own money, would buy provisions and whatsoever the people were searching for, and he was giving alms or then being nice with the people in front of the Hebrews. And then he would come near them, so he were then listening to them. Then someday a Hebrew brother went away of this group. At night had a dream, and this dream would give the understanding of these Cornelius then doing these acts, and gave a word the next day. And Cornelius was very contented with it. But what do we understand of these? He was then sent to Joppa to visit then with Shimon. For what objective? Receiving more instructions. What do we read from the Greco-Roman translation? Absolutely scoundrelized beyond imagination. Then you find Cornelius himself, not being from the Hebrew lineage, going up with them and having visions of angels. They barely show up when the temple was active. Now they showed up to a person of the army, an unbeliever. Can you believe it? And then Cornelius, other word, then listening to him, and he was giving orders because he had an understanding from heaven. Scoundrel.